Good morning. Shit. Oop, my water. Good morning. All right. Okay. Okay. Well, that was fun. And that was fun. Let's see. Okay. Getting started. Hello, YouTube. Let me hit the record and I won't keep you waiting today. There, there we go. Perfect. Good morning. Welcome to Rise and Shine. My name is Coach Lacey. If you haven't already followed me or hit that subscribe button wherever you found me on the wild web, be sure to do so that you are notified every time I go live or share something new. It is Tuesday. It is June 10th, and today it's a beautiful, hot day. And today we are talking about more harsh truths because that seems to be what I do. It's talking about the harsh truths. Yesterday I had an encounter that felt really sticky. Felt really sticky. And a friend that I care about, someone I've supported, somebody that I loved and prayed for, and have assisted with. I was giving them a little unsolicited advice, and I'm pretty sure it made her upset. And I wasn't doing it to cut them down or to be right, but I felt spirit prompt me and I had something to share and I care about this person. So I really wanted them to reflect on this situation that has been a thorn, like not even a thorn in their side, but this situation that has been the mantra for the last year or so, from what I could tell. And, people get stuck in these places if they tell themselves these things and I'm so busy, I'm so overwhelmed, I've got so much going on. I can't even think straight. How could I ever keep things together? That sort of thing. And my advice to somebody like that is always cut something out and make some room. So when we make room and create space, sometimes we have to take something away in order to create space. Maybe not necessarily take it away, but crowd it out with that new energy and just, take a look at what's important in life. And I wasn't saying these things to be rude. I wasn't saying these things to cut them down or to be right. I was saying these things because I care. And whoa, the energy just got sucked out of the room, stopped, and I got the evil eye. I got the worst evil eye that I've ever like gotten from a friend. And I'm like, whoa, bro. My advice was unsolicited, and that ego was just the ego's always kind of there with this person. And it really showed up loud and it got me thinking all about humility and ego and constructive criticism and feedback, and how we show up in the world with other people in terms of humility and what it means to be humble. What does it really mean to be humble? And how do we stay humble when we have walked through so much or we have a lifetime of knowledge that we're sharing? How can we still be the teacher and be humble? Is the question, really, and learn from others. Not even being the teacher, how can we even be the student and be humble? How can we show up in the world in a way that says, I honor you, I see you, thank you, I love you, this is not offensive? How can we show up and not be offended? How can we show up and not take constructive criticism or ideals that maybe are not our own and not take offense to that and not have that barrier show up in ego? I've been that person too, long ago. Um, that person that couldn't take feedback without spiraling, and people that confuse love for comfort. Um, that if the thought is if something hurts, that it must not be done with love. Um, and that is someone who can't see the difference between an attack and an invitation to learn a lesson and to grow from it. What is the difference between an actual attack and constructive criticism? What does that look like when we are conversing with other people? How can we give criticism with love or instruction with love and not be abrasive? And then consequently, how can we take that criticism and feedback and not become offended, right? And this is something that I've mastered in my life. I'm pretty relatively unoffendable unless you really just come at me with some bullshit. But other than that, if I am, given some feedback, I reflect on the feedback and I say, oh yeah, maybe I could do that better. Perhaps my words are a little skewed or slurred, and I need to slow down and think about what I'm going to say before I say it. That's been constructive criticism that I've had, is that I need to slow down a little bit and think before I speak. Okay, maybe not have so much word vomit there. I take on a lot of projects all at once. Maybe I need to be more intentional and delegate. Things like that nature. And sometimes people have come at me with um rude feedback. Like one time I was told long ago when I was in my 20s and I first started working in the professional world, one of my colleagues said that I looked frumpy. And man, I took that to the bank. And I tell you what, you won't ever catch me out in public in sweatpants ever again, because I took that constructive feedback and I made a change. And so, how can we look at feedback and say, maybe there's some truth to that, and that doesn't mean anything about my self-worth. That just gives me a chance to upgrade and look at that and take a moment to reflect, think, and be grateful and make a change. We just have to accept criticism and constructive opinions as a gift. It's not something to be upset about. It's not something to lose your shit over. Constructive criticism is a gift so that we can level up to the best version of ourselves. Because if we continually stay in the same patterns, we will never actually ascend into that next level. And those of us who are on a continual journey of growth, we require constructive criticism so that we can continue to grow and make those changes. I need constructive criticism, especially in my line of work. If I'm working with a client, for example, if I'm working on a website with a client for a client and they don't like the design I've come up with, I would really love it if they said something. Because if I pump out a product that isn't what they loved and wanted and what they were envisioning, I want to know. And I want to know what it is, what colors need to change, what font needs to change, what verbiage needs to change. What can we do to make this better for you to be what you envisioned, right? And consequently, it's the same with us. What is it that we can take from that conversation, even if it's said with hatred or anger? What can we take from that conversation and not internalize it? When that person said I looked frumpy, back then I did internalize it and it really broke me. But now if someone was to say something like that to me, I would go, oh, okay, sounds like this bothers you. And I'd want to know why this bothers them, why me showing up frumpy or less than professional is a bother to this person. And maybe it would be, well, you're working for my establishment and my establishment is has integrity and we show up in our best as our best selves, and that is reflected in the clothes that you wear. So I'd really love it if you would level up a bit and get up to speed with us over here, lady. And so in my 20s, I didn't know how to handle that sort of comment. So what did I do? I will show you. And I went to the other end and I, dressed to the nines for years. It was always top to bottom, dressed to the nines. And I'll show you, and it was like almost an invitation for a challenge, And as I've gotten older, I reflect back on that and I think to myself, she was right. Number one, I was not dressed professionally. And number two, she did me a favor because I had to take a look at myself and where that was triggering and why that triggered me. And as I've gotten older and as I've gone on in my life and in my years, I'm almost 40 now, I'm 39. And I have realized that what other people's opinions are or their constructive criticisms, oftentimes it's a reflection of where they're at in their heart and in their mind. And it doesn't really have much to do with me. But if I can take the thing that's, I guess, bothersome and make myself better for, a better version of myself from that little ounce of feedback and not take offense to it, great. That's great, right? So her getting upset with me yesterday didn't, it wasn't a verbal upset. There was no actual, like, it was all just energy. There was no verbal exchange of it, of, hey, you really upset me. It was just a shutdown of like, blocked, you're done. I don't want to talk to you. What are you even talking about? How dare you? How dare you approach me with such a constructive criticism that may be accurate, but I've got an excuse as to why I don't want to address it. Ah, there we go. So excuses, excuses. A lot of times when people come at us with some constructive criticism, it could be that we don't actually know how to make a change. Could be we have a trouble with letting go. Like that could be something that we need to work on. Could also be that we don't value that person's opinion or we see that person as some sort of a threat in some way. Maybe they didn't do what we wanted them to do. Maybe they come off as abrasive. Maybe the community isn't, maybe they're not very popular in the community. In my case, that would be, I have people who love me and people who hate me. And sometimes the people who don't like me are pretty loud about that. And if you're associated with me, then you will not have a place in their clique. And I understand that, but I don't care. And so I love people and I just want to help and I'll continue to be me. And, um, I've been that person who can't take feedback, as I said. So I'm not like upset about this. It's just a learning example. I use a lot of these things as examples. Um, and I've sat with the heartache of many friends that have misunderstood my rough edges and my verbal diarrhea, so to speak, I guess. I am very pointed and I am very um, I don't beat around the bush. I don't play the game. I'm not going to play the game with you. If you want to pretend about something, we're not going to pretend here. If you're going to give me an excuse, I'm going to cut right through it like a knife and I'm going to expose it and say, why? What now? And consequently, I would hope that my friends and family do the same for me because that's how we really level up, you know? And these heartaches have all taught me something that things that constructive criticism can bruise the ego, really. And when you bruise that ego, it kind of like punctures, it almost breaks through that barrier and starts to open up a little bit of light. And so there's a friction that fights back. The ego comes back out and the light is trying to come back in and the soul is trying to release and level up, but the ego won't let it. And so when defensiveness kicks in and we start explaining ourselves instead of just breathing and listening, mm, we that's not a position of strength when we get defensive or when pride shows up. When pride starts to show up as defensiveness and excuses and explaining, that's self-protection. That's actually not strength. That's a force field that you've built around yourself, and it is counterintuitive to strength, and it actually, pushes you further deep into the rabbit hole. And it's really just old pain coming up, trying to be disguised as power. And I know this because I was like that once, and I used to armor up the second I felt exposed. And I would, come up with all the excuses, come up with all of these reasons, all the reasons, the defensiveness would come in, and then every reason under the book would come out. And what I've learned is that all excuses are lies. No, they're just lies that we tell ourselves to take the easy road and leave the rest behind us, All excuses are lies. There's always a reason we do things. We have a choice. We are not without choices. And so to have an excuse is to ignore our responsibility. And maybe, maybe you don't know the path, maybe you don't know the way. And instead of coming up with an excuse, just say, I don't know how to move forward. Or maybe what I'm doing isn't working. Or perhaps I do need to put this down so I can make room for bigger and better things. Because the reality is if we are spreading ourselves too thin in all of these areas, we are not able to fully focus our energy into one big push of energy. And so we we have to really self-reflect on where our resistance is and where the stickiness is at and where wobbles are at, and reevaluate. Sometimes we love things, but they're not working for us. And if that is the case, then we need to once again anchor in. We need to anchor in and, start with one step at a time. Because in order for us to fix the problem, we have to be realistic, like we have to be radically real with ourselves. We have to be radically truthful, and we have to look at those things we don't want to look at. We have to pull up the rug and see the mess underneath. Because there's usually some sort of a mess. It might not be a huge mess, but there's usually some dust under there. And strength, it doesn't come from, you know, winning. It doesn't come from, being smarter than everybody else and being the teacher and being the guide and being, the one. We're all the one. We all have something to teach. We all have something to learn. We are all but humble students. And if we can come at life and come at constructive criticism with an open heart and an open mind and say, use me, Lord, what is it that I need to make a change in? What is it that I need to surrender to? And how can I put my sword down so that when it comes time to pick it back up, that I'm stronger? You know, we need to surrender and let go. Let go and let God. We need to let go of the need to win. Let go of the need to be recognized. Let go of the need to be the smartest one in the room. You don't need to prove your worth. But you need to prove your worth to anyone, right? Humility is when we choose to be open and stay open. Humility is when we choose to fight through those moments of wanting to completely shut down and instead, being open and willing to make a change, try a new door, try something that you've never even considered, and it might actually work out for the better, you know? It's sitting in the discomfort. Being humble means that we sit in discomfort and we don't run away from it. And we say, what can we learn from this moment and this discomfort? Maybe I don't know everything and maybe I don't have it all figured out. And that's okay. I don't need to know everything. I'm not God. You know, it's having the willingness, being humble is having the willingness to be seen. and to be seen in your process as you go through life and not be perfect. What does that, that's so vulnerable to not feel like you are showing up perfectly. So to be humble is to be strong, and to have humility is to hold power. And if you surrender, it doesn't mean that you are giving up. Sometimes we need to surrender the battle so that we can gain our strength and learn these lessons, level up, and start a new battle. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to say goodbye to things that you love forever, but it does mean that you need to let go of what doesn't serve you anymore. What's not going towards the higher purpose, and letting go of pride and performance and the need to feel worthy and accepted. Who cares? Like, why? Why do you care? Why do you care what anybody really thinks of you? I mean, sure, we can take constructive criticism and that's great and we need that. But overall, if there's an opinion about you, does it really matter what people think of you? Now, if you want to use it as a metric for change, great, but to dwell on what other people think of you is it's just going to make you depressed. It's not um it's not fruitful to look at the collective consensus of who the public thinks you might be, and not and take that and internalize that as the truth, rather than just taking these little like constructive criticisms and saying, okay, what can I do differently? I can make this change. All right, I'm going to work on that. Set it down. Right? Great. But who you are and your identity is not determined by other people. Who you are is actually determined by God, and you get to live that out. You did not create yourself. We have a divine design and a calling on our life, and it's time for us to act like it. But it's also time for us to surrender to something bigger than ourselves, be humble, and, be able to take the pain, be able to withstand the storm, anchor in, hold on to the glimmers, look at what's good in your life and what you're thankful for, and then look at what you can change and what can, remain the same, but maybe alter a little bit, or maybe enhance or accentuate. What can you do today to level up with that constructive criticism? And how can that give you peace, right? You don't want to abandon yourself to make someone comfortable, but you don't want to take things personal when you know that they're not about you. So take what you can from the constructive criticism with humility and love and say, thank you. I'll reflect on that. Maybe I can use some of that in the future. But don't take it personally. Don't use it as an excuse to explain yourself, or, try to prove your worth. Say thank you. I appreciate you caring about me enough and having the courage to say something. Because it takes a lot of courage for some people to give constructive criticism. Others give it freely, of course. And that is just who they are. And that's maybe something they need to work on. But for some of us, it's difficult to give constructive criticism. And when we give that constructive criticism, it's from a place of love and not a place of ego. And that's difficult for people. And people who are operating out of a place of pride and ego often get triggered by those who are not, and because it's something that they want. When you are triggered by something, it's either by something that you are like kind of jealous of, or it's something that like hurts your soul, or it's something that you've experienced and you don't want to experience again, which again hurts your soul, right? So when getting triggered, when you are triggered, if it's something little, like some constructive criticism, reflect on that. Why does the constructive criticism trigger you? Why does someone else's feedback trigger you? Is it because you're full of excuses and you need to explain yourself and you're maybe doing a lot of things and you're tired and you don't have all the energy to do the things, but you don't want to give anything up because it makes you feel like you'd be a failure? Time to reflect on that, you know? You're not alone. You're not alone in this. We all have things to work on, you know? We all have missions. We all have a divine design and a purpose for our life. We all have people to serve, a mission to live, but we have to keep going and we don't have to push, push, push. Sometimes it's soft with clear boundaries and an open heart. What can I learn from this? This doesn't mean anything about me, like this whole anger, ego thing. That's not all about me, but what can I learn from this? So if you haven't already, anchor in to your wellness foundations. What can you control today? What are your controllables? If you're struggling with your own ego or with constructive criticism and you don't know where to start, I would suggest that you start working on your mindset and start listening to some positive affirmations of some sort. Great place to start is always Tony Robbins or Les Brown, because we have to rewire our mind in order to stop viewing everything as an attack. Even if you have been working in the wellness industry of some branch of the wellness industry for decades, there's still something to be learned. One time I was working with someone, a physician, and she said, "Oh, I know everything. I already know this. I don't need to learn this." And my thought was we are perpetual students throughout life. We are always going to be learning. Even the masters became masters because they kept practicing the basics. But there's always something to learn, even if we are looking at something we've already learned with fresh eyes. There's always something that you can learn, and there's always something that you can shift so that you can become a better version of yourself. And that's hard sometimes. And sometimes we don't want to do that. I've been there, I get it. So control your controllables. If you're sitting in grief today from the week before, because I know our community is just hurting, remember, I am here for you. I have openings on my schedule for coaching. If you need to just sit with someone and chat, I'm here. I'm listening. I have some homework assignments for those of you who are grieving. You can always go back to through my YouTube and watch some of my grief videos. But you're not alone. Life is messy. It's a shit show. But if we show up in humility and we surrender and we show up with true love, real love, showing up with real love is being able to take that constructive criticism and give it. Being able to verbally give that constructive criticism in a place of safety and have it being received and say, yeah, maybe I'll work on that. That is a gift. It doesn't mean that you're failing if someone gives you constructive criticism. It just means that you have more to work on and you're human. So anchor in, get your water, anchor in, nourish yourself, get some movement in today, and enjoy the day. Create some space. What can you let go today? How can you surrender? And how can you show up with more humility? I will see you tomorrow. I hope that you have a beautiful, beautiful day. Get out, enjoy the sunshine, and be sure to anchor in. Let's rise and shine.